Keisha Reaves is a Georgia native that has witnessed the stigma of mental health and has made it her mission to normalize therapy. She has been in the mental health field for more than 16 years. She obtained her bachelor's degree in psychology and human services from Clayton State University, and then completed her master's degree in counseling and psychology at the University of West Alabama. Black maternal health and reproductive education is a strong passion of hers, and her mission is to provide access to resources and mental health services to women of color. Keisha specializes in helping everyday women who seek to improve their ability to cope with their daily challenges through holistic practices and talk therapy. In addition to helping women, Keisha is also certified in perinatal mental health, serving women who are trying to conceive, have fertility issues, have experienced infant loss, transitioning into motherhood, as well as postpartum depression. She has volunteered with the Northside Hospital's bereavement group. She serves on the Postpartum Support International Georgia Chapter Board, and she currently is one of the facilitators of the Motherwise group at Atlanta Birth Center.
Hi, everybody. I am so excited to be here. I'm so excited to be able to host this breakout session. We are talking about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. But before we get started, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a podcaster. I also have 2 kids. I have a 4-year-old and an almost 11-month-old. After I gave birth to my 4-year-old, I suffered from postpartum anxiety disorders. And with my 11-month-old, he was a 2020 baby. And we know what 2020 was like. And it was difficult even for me as a clinical therapist, being able to witness a civil uprising, everything that was going on with Black Lives Matter, and then giving birth to my second Black son. And also trying to enjoy motherhood and everything that encompassed, while also witnessing everything that was going on in our country and in our world. And I knew that if I was having a difficult time wrapping my head around that, and navigating that space, and I'm someone who went to school for this, I could only imagine what it was like for people who were not aware of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, or were not aware or had been exposed to counseling. And that's a huge reason why I am so passionate about Black maternal health, because motherhood for Black women is different. It looks different than all of our other counterparts. We have to navigate the world a little bit differently. We have to think about things that others don't. And like I was saying, like with raising my Black sons, having to think about, okay, when they become teenagers and they start to drive, how am I going to go over this drill of a script of what they need to take into consideration if they get pulled over by the police? But then also trying to be present at the fact that they're just babies. But this is the responsibility and the thought process that Black mothers have to go through. So we're going to talk about a little bit of all of that. What I want you to know that this is a very brief overview of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders 101. And that is because typically when I do this training, it's for our 101 perinatal moods and anxiety disorder that Chantrice talked about, the 101 training that we do. And I squeeze it into an hour. So I'm going to squeeze this into half of an hour. So I'm going to give you just the basic information so that you'll be able to walk away and have a clear understanding. And why it's important that we talk about PMADs for Black women is usually there's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of misinformation about postpartum. Usually when we hear the word postpartum, a lot of people immediately think it is a woman who wants to harm her baby, or it's a woman that's unstable. Society kind of put that in a lot of people's minds, of thinking of it that way. But postpartum is actually the stage that happens after mother gives birth. It is the months that happens after she welcomes her new baby. And a huge thing that we want to talk about during this section that I'm speaking on is being able to break the stigma, being able to have more education about it so that we know how to support and help mothers that are suffering. I remember after I had my first son, and I was struggling, and I remember telling somebody, and by the way, I'm originally from Georgia. I'm from South Georgia, Milledgeville, Georgia, if anybody knows where that is. So I know what it's like to be in the more rural communities. Um, I remember someone had said to me, "You'll be able to get through it. Our ancestors got through it." And, that's a very complicated statement because our ancestors dealt with so much. But something that we're very fortunate to have for us is options, and being able to have the options to get help, to ask for help, to be supported, and to be able to be the best versions of ourselves that we can be. So let's get started. Let's talk about it. Let's move on to the next slide. Um, I want you to have an understanding when we say PMADs, because you're going to hear that reference a lot throughout today's training. PMAD stands for Perinatal Mood and Anxiety Disorders. And it's an umbrella term for mental disorders that women encounter during pregnancy and up to 1 year after birth. So when we used to say, or people would say, oh, they have postpartum depression, or, oh, I think, if she has postpartum depression, she may harm herself or her children. The reason why it's called perinatal mood and anxiety disorder is because it's a spectrum. It does not look like one thing. It's not a woman sitting in a dark room. It's not always a woman sitting in a dark room being by herself. It can also look like a woman at work that's laughing and talking with her coworkers. It's not something that you can always tell just by looking at someone. That's why being able to ask questions, being able to provide resources to every mom is so beneficial, because some mothers, Black mothers, can internalize what they're dealing with and not give them the space to be able to actually face what they're feeling and experiencing. And it doesn't just look like depression. It can look like anxiety. It can look like obsessive compulsive disorder. It can look like postpartum bipolar. And it can also look like postpartum psychosis. So we're going to talk about a few different areas of that umbrella, but we're also going to dive a little bit deeper in the more common diagnoses that most women do get. So let's move on to the next slide. So let's talk about what we're going to be talking about today. This is a very brief, broad overview, like I was saying, of how we're going to learn and understand more about PMADs. And remember, PMADs is perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. So you're going to walk away today having a better understanding of what that is. And we're going to talk about the stigma within the Black community in dealing with PMADs. We're also going to talk about risk factors. Oftentimes people think of PMADs as being something that's only hormonal or chemical imbalance, but risk factors plays a huge, huge role. And the more we know about the risk factors, the more that we can take some proactive and preventative steps to support a mother before giving birth. And then also understanding the signs and symptoms of PMADs. So the more that we know about it, the more that we can see it, the more that we can understand the symptoms, the more that we can break the stigma, and it's not something that's culturally looked down upon or is associated with any type of shame. It's something that we can be able to acknowledge and make a mother feel like she's supported and she's not alone. The other thing is treatment options and where to go to get help. That's also super important, because it's like, okay, I know what I have. I know what symptoms I'm experiencing. What do I do now? Or how can I be able to feel better? All right, so the next slide. We're also going to talk a little bit about statistics. So I wanted to have the first statistic at the top be very large for everybody to really see the impact of how it affects Black mothers. One in three African American mothers suffers from postpartum depression, compared to one in seven white mothers in the US. So that is, to break it down into stats form, 33% of Black women suffer from postpartum depression in comparison to 14% of white women. Oftentimes, whenever I present that data, I'm often posed with the question of, well, why is that? Um, how did that happen? Well, there's tons of reasons why that exists. First thing is the mortality rate that Black women have to deal with. For anyone who doesn't know about the numbers, so nearly 800 women die in childbirth every year in the US. Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth related issues. That's huge. In Georgia, we're at the top of the list in comparison with that data. So you can have a Black mother who's pregnant and she's very anxious and worried about, am I going to live through my pregnancy? Am I going to give birth and still be here? Is my baby still going to be here? Am I going to be able to trust my medical providers? And that's real. And I don't know if you guys had heard about that, but the mortality rate also does not matter your socioeconomic status. It doesn't matter about your education. Black mothers are dying. Even Serena Williams, who has a chronic disease, had shared her story of how she was fighting with her doctors about her diagnosis and her symptoms and not feeling heard and being very adamant about getting the care that she needed. So we have Black women who are dealing with the anxiety about worrying about giving birth. And then after that, we have to deal with racism. We have to deal with not trusting our medical providers. We have to deal with implicit biases, all of those things. Down here, we also have 60% of women of color do not receive any treatment and support services for perinatal emotional complications. Those reasons kind of vary, but it can include lack of insurance coverage, social and cultural stigma. So like I told you before, I'm from South Georgia, the ruralness. It within our culture, we know, we keep all of our privacy within our household. You do not have your business in the streets. You don't tell people or you don't talk to strangers about what you have going on because it can look bad on the family. Or you go to your pastor and you talk to them. And that can hold us back from getting the help that we need. And so having so much more of an understanding and education about what a woman is suffering from can help her get the help that she needs. Plus, there's also logistical barriers to get services, such as getting transportation to go see a therapist or a medical provider, having childcare, being able to get time off from work. And then another huge one is the lack of culturally appropriate care. A lot of rural areas, it may be a Black mother wanting to go to a therapist. She may have a therapist that is a white man who has no maternal mental health education, and she may not be able to feel comfortable to talk about what it is that she's experiencing. And that can be a barrier for her to get some competent and helpful resources for herself. So those are kind of the barriers that they're suffering from. Then Black women in the US are at a higher risk for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders and are less likely to get treatment and receive quality mental health care. We're going to talk about risk factors, but there is the strong Black woman syndrome. And I'm sure we're all aware of what that is, that we got to get it done. We don't have time to give ourselves some space to deal with anxiety or depression. We got to take care of these kids. We got to get these bills paid. We got to go to work. We have to be strong. And I always like to tell the clients that I work with that there is so much strength in vulnerability. And with being vulnerable, you are courageous and you are strong and you're able to be the best version of yourself. So being able to reframe that and get rid of that myth or that thought process that we have to grin and bear it, but that we're able to welcome understanding and being uplifted. The next one is PMADs that are left untreated directly impacts health outcomes for both mothers and babies and lead to 90% higher healthcare costs overall. So something that we don't often talk about is the fact that it doesn't only just affect mom, it also affects the whole family. If a mother is experiencing PMADs, that's affecting the baby and how the baby has development, how the baby then grows up and how they show up at school. It also affects her partner. Partners, oftentimes 50% of the time, also experience anxiety or depression if a mother is suffering from PMADs. So it affects the whole family, and it can have long-term effects. So that's also a huge thing. And we're going to talk about if a mother is left untreated, how that shows up in the family as well. We can move on to the next slide. All right, so this graph, I don't want you to focus too much on the numbers, but what I want you to really take away from this is being able to look at the drastic difference in comparison. So antepartum anxiety, that's when I was talking about if a mother is pregnant and she's dealing with some anxiety symptoms, and being able to look at that. That's something that's super common and something that mothers experience. And 14% to 23% of pregnant women will experience anxiety or depression during their pregnancy. At the bottom of the graph is postpartum psychosis. So this is what society or even the media sometimes has a lot of people associate PMADs with. If a woman says, I have postpartum depression, a lot of people immediately think, oh, she wants to harm herself. She wants to harm her baby. She having delusions or hallucinations. Most of the time, if a mother is experiencing those symptoms, that is postpartum psychosis. And that is something that is not as common as the other diagnoses that are PMADs. So for postpartum psychosis, 1 to 2 in 1,000 women experience that. So it's not as common. It is more so rare when we think about postpartum anxiety and depression. Baby blues. 80% of mothers experience baby blues. It's super common when we think about when a woman is pregnant, their hormones are sky high. And then they give birth and they just crash down. And then when they're breastfeeding, it's just kind of like waving and flowing, and it's just trying to get their adjustment. And so a mother from 2 days after giving birth up to 2 weeks may experiencing crying spells, feeling overwhelmed. All of that is super common. You know, you're adjusting to having a new baby, your hormones are adjusting, and several women experience this. And then with postpartum anxiety and depression, 15% of mothers experience postpartum depression, 10% often experience postpartum anxiety. We're going to talk about risk factors, but even for postpartum anxiety, for me, example, I was a first-time mom with my first. We had moved to an area that was very far away from all of our supports. My husband worked 2 hours away. I was at home alone with the new baby. My baby had colic, so he cried at all hours of the day and night. I was extremely sleep deprived, and I was always anxious of, am I going to do this right? Am I going to be able to calm him? Am I going to soothe him? Plus taking on that strong Black woman syndrome of, I got to be able to do this. You know, this is what I was built for. This is why I'm here. I should be able to know what to do. And then getting anxiety at night of, am I going to sleep tonight? Am I going to be able to get any rest? And then the lack of sleep builds up the anxiousness, the irritability, and also depression. So it's a combination of several things that can have any mother experience that on top of breastfeeding and then having her hormones trying to find their footing. So you can see how anybody can be able to experience this, and no one is far removed from it. And the huge thing that I always like to tell women is that this is treatable. Just because you get a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder doesn't mean that you are going to have to suffer for the rest of your life. A lot of women may feel hopeless, and after giving birth, feeling like their lives have drastically changed. And will they ever feel like themselves again? They've had this baby that they really wanted, but they've had this sense of loss of freedom and often feeling very overwhelmed. And it is hard. It's a huge adjustment. That's why supports are so important. That's why being able to be vulnerable, talk about what you're experiencing, can be so helpful. We'll get a little bit more into that, but I just wanted you to see how most often women experience postpartum anxiety disorder and depression, as well as baby blues, are more so the common ones that women experience. We can go on to the next slide. Okay, so risk factors. This is huge. This is when I was talking about how oftentimes people think that with PMADs, it is mainly associated with hormones or chemical imbalance, but risk factors plays a huge, huge part in all of this. So remember how I talked about the strong Black woman syndrome. If we're able to break that stigma, we can be able to really uplift and do so much for Black women. Being able to get them to know it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to build a tribe. It does not mean that you are weak. It doesn't mean that you do not know what to do. It means that you are taking on as much advice, as much support, so that you can show up and be the person that you want to be. At the end of today, you guys are going to be able to participate in the self-care session that's going to happen. But there's this book that I highly recommend. It's by a Nigerian writer. Her name is R, and I cannot pronounce her last name, so I don't want to butcher it. But the name of the book is Of Mothers and Daughters. And she talks about her relationship with her mother. Her mother definitely was a strong Black woman who had that syndrome. But she talked about how her mother would come home from long hours of work. She had 6 children. She would be very, annoyed, irritable, have all these responsibilities, bills to pay, kids running around, dealing with her own work stress. And she described her mother as just always being in a mood or always yelling or them getting whoopings, her telling them, you need to get this done, you need to get this done, and not just waking up just pleasant. Something that's super important is being able for a Black woman to take care of herself, to refuel herself, to pour back into herself so that she can show up to be the mother that she wants to be. And that's how we can have support from the community, have support from other women, or have support from your partner, family, doulas, anyone, church members, neighbors, whatever the case may be, so that you can have that space to be the mom and the woman that you want to be, so that you can show up and be the mother that you want to be. The next huge risk factor is racism. The panel is going to talk a little bit about secondary trauma today, but secondary trauma is real. And that is when something happens that you may not firsthand participate in, but something that you witness that affects you. Last year, we all saw the news. We saw killings after one Black person, after another Black person. And this is like over years of just seeing it over on the news, marches and fights for justice and peaceful protests. And it affects us, and it has you thinking about your children. It has you thinking about your future, your partners, your loved ones. And it also affects how you parent, how you take care of yourself, how that sits with you, how that affects your mental health. And that can set you up for a risk factor. It's unfortunate because it is, like I said, Black motherhood just looks different for us. But that's why it's so important for us to talk about what we're experiencing so that we can get the support and the resources that we need and not feel alone in what it is that's affecting us. Like I was saying, like raising 2 Black boys, I'm just having a baby and I'm already thinking about a script to talk to him about when he's 16, versus just being present in the fact that I'm welcoming this new child. The next one is impaired trust in the medical community. That's something that's very real for us. It was not that long ago where segregation existed and Black people had to go to different medical facilities to receive treatment. And not trusting the medical staff. I talked to you about Serena Williams, what she was experiencing, feeling as if our voices are not heard, feeling as if we are ignored or disregarded when we want to express the symptoms that we're experiencing. And that can set us up for, like we talked about, the mortality rate, or feeling like you don't want to share when you're talking to your provider because you feel like you may be disregarded. That's a risk factor when you are sitting with your symptoms and not talking about it because you don't trust. The other one is personal or family history of mental illness. Um, Kind of thinking about what other mental illness, being able to have conversations with your own mother, grandmother, or other women in your family, had they had postpartum depression or anxiety disorders, and just being able to know about your family history. Then complications with delivery. If you have any type of birth trauma, you thought you were going to have a vaginal birth, but then you had to have an emergency C-section. Breastfeeding is huge. If there's having any type of complications with latching, milk supply is not coming through, as well as birth. If your baby came with any type of diagnosis, if they had to go to the NICU, all of that can be very traumatic. It can cause any type of anxiety, depression, PTSD. Infant temperament. Remember, I shared my son had colic. And I'm like up on the internet all night trying to figure out, how to change my diet. What can I do? How can I comfort him? And as well as high needs. If a woman has multiples, having twins, and not knowing how to kind of like cope. Life stressors. Life stressors can be if you don't have the same maternity leave that you thought you were going to have, if you have to go back to work sooner, if finances are affected, if you have to move, if you and your partner did not work out and you end up being a single parent, if that wasn't something that was expected, something happens within the family, if there was a death, anything that's just very stressful in addition to you adjusting to motherhood. Lack of healthy family or social support. Something that is, thank you, Shanita. She found that, of mothers and daughters. Thank you for putting that in the chat. Lack of social support. So that is a lot of the times, like when we think about our Parents' Day, especially like with my mother, she lived on a street and everybody was related to her. Her aunt, great grandmother, grandmother, cousins, the whole road was the entire family. That's very different than what it is now. A lot of us have moved for jobs, school. We're very far away. We've had to create villages from different friends. And sometimes we may not have developed those supports yet. Support is huge. And you see there that the pandemic is also a risk factor, but the pandemic has really reevaluated how we look at supports, because a lot of us may not just have people coming in our house like we used to, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, when we were on lockdown, and being able to kind of reevaluate how we want our supports to show up and what that looks like. The other one is a history of infertility and infant loss. Being able to have anxiousness or feelings about finally having this baby after having a long journey of trying to conceive. And then for some mothers, it's having guilt because you are trying so hard to adjust to motherhood, can be something that shows up. And then previous trauma or abuse, if a mother is experiencing any type of sexual abuse, giving birth, there's a lot of people in the room. There's a lot of people touching you. That can be something that can cause a lot of flashbacks, a lot of trauma. Sleep deprivation. I told you when I had my son, he was colic. He was crying all night. I rarely got any sleep in those first couple of months. And the sleep deprivation got to the point where I was just like begging for any type of help, because eventually your body will just shut down. But you're trying to care for this loved one and just really just needing to figure something out to help with that. Sleep deprivation is just having proper sleep hygiene is so, so, so important. Financial problems. If finances are changing, you have this new baby, you're trying to support them, take care of everything, that can be a stressor. And then we talked about the pandemic. Life just looks different. For some, they may have thought, oh, I'm going to fly this person in, they're going to be in the house, they're going to help. And then the pandemic changed all of that. So when we think about the risk factors overall, when I was talking about while a woman is pregnant, and they're thinking about all of these risk factors they may currently have in their life, it's always a good idea to be able to think of getting additional support or resources to help you with those risk factors, or even having therapy ahead of time to kind of talk through that to prepare. Sometimes that may not always be the case. And those are just, it's what it is, and it can be a surprise. Like, you didn't know you were going to experience birth trauma. And we're going to talk about treatment options, but this is just to kind of give you an idea of some of the things that could happen environmentally for a mother that can kind of set someone up to have PMADs. So we can go on to the next slide. All right, so signs and symptoms. I was talking about how I have to give you kind of like an overview. So I can't go over all of the different types of postpartum, bipolar postpartum, PTSD, all of the ones that fit under the umbrella. But I am going to go over the signs and symptoms of the ones that are most common just because of time. So for postpartum depression, some of the signs and symptoms to look out for: low mood, sadness, tearfulness, loss of interest, joy, pleasure, agitation, difficulty concentrating, appetite, feelings of guilt, shame, hopelessness, possible thoughts of harming the baby or yourself. So those are things to kind of keep in mind for yourself or for anyone that you're working with, and being able to ask the right questions. Because it can be a woman, like when we think about Black women, remember, strong Black woman syndrome. She may be feeling all of these things, but you may not be able to see it. You may not be able to really take notice of the symptoms. They even may be having outlets that may be looking unhealthy. Maybe you're drinking wine, maybe smoking marijuana to self-medicate what they're experiencing. But just kind of keeping an eye of those symptoms that they're having, and being able to talk, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Or even if you are experiencing those symptoms, kind of like noticing, I haven't had any joy. I don't remember the last time I've laughed. I am having a hard time remembering things. I can't concentrate. I do feel like I'm not going to be able to get out of this feeling. I feel hopeless. That can kind of like ring a bell in your mind to want to get some help. Then for postpartum anxiety, constantly worrying, feeling that something bad is going to happen, feeling that you can't turn your brain off because you're thinking about this to-do list, or you're having these racing thoughts, not being able to sleep, appetite, feeling dizzy, heart palpitations, nausea. Some of those worries can be like, I want to make sure my baby stays alive. Let me stare at them while they're asleep throughout the night, even though I know I should be asleep. Or I don't want to walk by the balcony that's in my house because what if something happens to them? I don't want to drive in the car with them in the car. Just constant worrying about things. Is enough milk? Am I making enough milk? Just all of that can make them very, very anxious. Something that we had talked about that I'm just going to like briefly go through is postpartum psychosis and some of the symptoms that a woman may be experiencing with that. So remember how I said it's 1 to 2 in 1,000 women that may experience postpartum psychosis. So that's when they're having mood swings, delusions, disorganized thought, being able to have poor judgment, impaired functioning. Usually in those cases, if a woman is experiencing postpartum psychosis, they would need to be hospitalized to get stabilized. But those are some of the symptoms they may experience. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. All right, so treatment options. So this is a huge one. When you realize that you have these symptoms, where do you go? How do you get help? The first one that is super huge is being able to look at the support that's around you, that's within your community. There's a lot of free in-person or online groups. That's rather through Facebook, different organizations providing them. PSI offers tons of them. Your church, neighbors, family asking for help, or a friend. So like when we talk about breaking the stigma, being able to say, hey, I just don't feel like myself, or I'm having a hard time. Can I talk to somebody about it? Being able to call a girlfriend, being able to talk to your neighbor or somebody at your church, just being able to just say like, I don't know what to do. I just don't feel like how I used to. I think I need to talk to someone. I think I need some help. The second one is mental health therapy. Seeing a therapist during and after your pregnancy. The wonderful thing that has come up over the last year is the benefits of telehealth. Being able to get a therapist within your state that specializes in maternal mental health is huge, because you can be able to have a session via video. You don't have to drive. You can pull it up on your phone, on your computer, and still be able to get the help that you need. And then, like I said, having PMADs is treatable. You don't have to have this for the rest of your life. It's something that you can be able to come out of, be healthy, functioning, and be able to enjoy your life and be the mother that you want to be. The next treatment option is a holistic approach. So that's with supplements, exercise, light box therapy, meditation, exercises. So those are just to kind of give you like an idea. Now, when I had talked about what happens when a mother is left untreated, how does that show up? What does that look like? So for a mother that's that's untreated, being that she's dealing with these symptoms, she may not go to her visits with her doctor after she gives birth. She may not show up to all of the pediatrician appointments because she's had a loss of interest. She may just not be concentrating, may be forgetful. She may not pay attention to how she puts the baby down. And you remember, within that first year, a baby is very susceptible to SIDS. And then even just not being able to be present or attend to the needs, may not be able to bond with the baby. How it affects the baby may end up having attachment issues, having insecure or avoidant attachment, may have developmental issues, may even have some delays whenever starting in school. And then remember how I talked about the partner. 50% of the time, a partner who has a mother who is dealing with PMADs will have anxiety or depression themselves, and how that affects the whole family as a whole. So just being able to take that into consideration. All right, so let's go on to the next slide. So to wrap it all up, these are some resources. So like Shantry said, going on to the PSI website, there are tons of information for anybody. There is the PSI helpline that you can call, and you can be able to speak to someone. You can leave a message, they'll return your phone call within 24 hours, and it's someone that specializes in maternal mental health. You can call or text. Plus, on the website, PSI Georgia, there's a directory of a list of therapists that specializes in maternal mental health. They are vetted providers. Plus, there's tons of support groups for mothers, dads, various support groups on various topics surrounding maternal mental health. So PSI offers a wealth of resources for mothers. And then I also put my information down below for anyone that had any additional questions for me. And that's it. Okay, so I am looking at the chat just for a couple of additional questions. So are there PSI resources available to people outside of Georgia? Yes. I was referring to the PSI Georgia website, but we have a PSI Mothership website. So if you just go on to psi.net, I believe it is, but we'll have someone that can drop that link in the chat. They have a state, international map, and you can just put in your zip code and it can pull up all the resources at the location that you're at, so that you can be able to get some resources where you are. Medication as an option. So medication is an option. I just kind of talked about some three main ones, but medication definitely is. There's even perinatal psychiatrists that specialize in giving medication to mothers, knowing how to dose them throughout their pregnancy, if they're breastfeeding, and after they give birth. And there's also on the PSI Georgia website psychiatrists that specializes in that. Plus, we also have a phone number for psychopharmacology for any type of prescribers to consult on dosing and medications for mothers. So yes, medication is an option. All right, any more questions? All right, so I think that's all the questions. But like I said, thank you guys so much. Thank you for joining the summit. I hope this was helpful for you, and I hope you enjoy everything else that we have in store for you guys today.